like it that way. There we go. Okay. All righty, ready? Okay, well, thank you for coming to join us today. We're thrilled to have you. My name is Emily Wegner, and I am the 7 through 12 Social Studies Specialist for the Lee Summit School District.
And I am Kyle Anderson. I am the Director of Advanced Studies and Academic Excellence for the North Kansas City Schools. When Emily and I first started working together on this presentation, though, I was the Social Studies Coordinator in North Kansas City. So Emily and I go way back since elementary school. And so we've known each other for a very long time, but this is the first time we've actually presented together.
Right. Oddly enough, yeah, we went through the Lee Summit schools together. And didn't even know after graduating high school, we both pursued history careers at different colleges. And just recently, in the past couple of years, became reconnected professionally, which was really cool. And so we've been doing a lot of collaboration together, along with several other school districts in the Kansas City area. And we've been participating a lot with DESE here as well. And so kind of the burning idea that came, I guess, to fruition as us discussing this is, you keep hearing about the EOC, you keep hearing about the ACT scores, you keep hearing about all of these different things that kids are required to prove their mastery of. And the ACT is kind of one of the big enigmas behind all of this, because it's always, we say we shouldn't teach to a test. And this is one thing that there is no doubt that people teach to a test, because they specifically have ACT prep courses, in order to get you that 1 or 2 point advance, because so much is at stake with it. So when we were starting to talk about what we wanted to do, it was like, how can we get involved and find a way to kind of start unraveling this mystery that is the ACT?
Absolutely.
So grab a folder there of your choice.
Well, keeping within the context of being a historian. And so we're going to get through a little part of that. Please don't think we are the end-all, be-all experts of this by any means. What's in your folder is way more information than we're going to be able to get through today. But we knew we'd have an audience where we might have some folks who know a whole lot about ACT and some who might know very little. And so we're going to work really hard to meet the needs of everybody who's here today.
Okay. Now, because we are so small, if you all wouldn't mind, just tell us maybe where you're from and what your focus is, if we have time for that, if you want to. Go ahead.
Debbie Schmidt, St. Louis Public. I'm a consultant teacher.
Fantastic.
Lindsay Troutman, coordinator social studies, language arts for Columbia Public Schools.
Okay.
Sean Doyle, I teach at the Missouri School for the Blind here in St. Louis, social studies 612.
Fantastic. Okay.
Okay. Liz Hyman in Carver Academy. Got juniors and seniors right now, U.S., Western Civ, history.
Okay. Okay.
Mike Gavin, Kirkwood School District, Curriculum Office, supporting social studies amongst other things.
There you go.
Neil O'Donnell, I teach at Columbia, Illinois High School. I teach world history, econ, government right now.
I'm Rachel Feinberg. I teach at Lindbergh High School here in St. Louis, and I teach AP Psychology and U.S. History.
Fantastic. Okay.
Glenn Barnes, K-12 Social Studies Curriculum Specialist, St. Louis Public Schools.
Okay.
Very cool.
Gary McKinney, MOCHE President, St. Charles Community College, and we're always looking at developing better curriculum.
There you go. Okay. So as this is told, it's the practical approach to do better. And so we're going to dive on in here. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So the first item that's in your folder is a series of practice ACT reading tests that are all history. We just want you to open to the first one. It's a little passage, social science, that focuses on Eleanor Roosevelt. We're not asking you to take it by any means, but we would like to take just a few minutes, you and someone sitting around you, to just identify some noticings. What stands out about you? What skills do we need to help equip our young historians with to be successful on an assessment like this? So we'll just take 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll hear from you.
Okay. And feel free to move so that you're closer to a group that you can collaborate and discuss with, please. And these are yours, so you can write on these. You can take extras for your friends.
I think for a reader, they're gonna get hung up.
Being able to break down the question, what is the question really asking?
Physically, they're saying
That's a big one.
Well, and you've also, in this type of a reading, you've got the issues dealing with the social role of women at the time and why she was so exceptional. You know, what was expected of how many women were involved in politics at that time. How many women do we have in the Senate? Zero. How many now? None. It's 3 pages, get over it. I have kid vocabulary. I have a little bit of background.
So they're having to.
We're going to give you guys about another minute, and then we're going to have you share out some. And because we're in this particular room, they are doing recording of the voices. So if you could actually turn your microphone on before you speak, that would be very helpful. So another minute. Perfect. Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and come back together here. When was the last time you actually looked at an ACT assessment? Anybody remember? Since you took one? Since you took one? And see, there's this idea that the ACT, it's like, oh, well, the social studies is not a tested area, so we don't need to worry about that, right? We don't need to worry about that. But that actually could not be further from the truth. And so
Yeah, absolutely. So while we started off looking at the social sciences passage in particular, a lot of what we talk about today will apply to every test, every section, because let's be honest, this is a reading test. And the more we can do to really help equip our students to effectively and closely read, the better they're going to be able to do. Would like to hear from a few folks, though, in terms of some noticings, some takeaways, something that stood out to you, something you have a question about.
I guess the first thing.
Microphone.
The first thing that we talked about was vocabulary, and then like the setup of the page. So you're doing like tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 vocabulary, content specific, as well as just scholarly vocabulary, and then tier 2 that would cross into either realm, and then just the formatting of the page, like you were discussing, and teaching students how to use just like QER and SPR now become these representative peoples, and the formatting that different social sciences texts take. As well as, I mean, if I'm a young lady now who doesn't have the schema of why Oliver Roosevelt was so foundational because I grew up in gender roles, and it's just like, I'm starting to build all of these roadblocks if I don't have all of it.
Very true, very good. Thank you for sharing. Someone else?
Our group had also talked about the questions themselves, that some of them are asked as a question, and some of the structure of the question is simply the beginning of a statement and then A, B, or C, which one actually makes a real sentence that makes any sense.
Yes,
rather than being a question per se.
absolutely. And the more you dive into it, the more you're going to start seeing question clues that can help sometimes give away the right answer. Sometimes they're historically based. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're more just general reading vocabulary. Every time we have an example in here, the very next page has the answers. I know oftentimes people are like, I want to know what the answer to that one is. And so we include them in here just for you. These are all actual ACT passages. These are not anything that were produced by us or a testing company. And whenever we use exemplars, we like to stand on what the real test looks like. Because while we're going to have a little bit of practice later on, it's very difficult to get super close to what is actually on the ACT.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about our goals for today. We essentially are going to want to provide you with an overview of how that ACT test is constructed, because that really is a big part of it. If you have had any students that take this, the number one challenge they face is the lack of time. And it's not because they don't know how to read in many cases. It's not because they don't know the content or whatever else. It's simply they do not have the stamina to read at the pace that is required in order to be successful on the test, to at least get through the questions. And so one of the strategies in the ACT class is, about how do you manage that time? And that's a relevant issue and topic. But we can't really get into the heart of what's going to make students do better until we can actually understand the structure and construction of the test. Examples of readings that we're going to give you, and then show you the process of creating the readings, because the biggest thing is exposure. And I don't know if you all have been familiar with the concept of these new tech-enhanced questions that might be coming up on the new EOC courses. And the fact that if students do not have practice with the technology-enhanced system, then they're going to fail on a test, and it has nothing to do with their knowledge of the content. It has to do with their lack of exposure to the tool which is required to measure their mastery of the content. So we're also going to show you, we're going to actually create some questions that correspond with some readings that we have given you. And that right there is the biggest part. Everybody wants to have this, but not everybody has the time. Right? So that lack of time to create. So we're going to make a couple of things here today, and then we will make sure that if you're interested, we will share them out with you so that you have them at the end of the session. And so you'll leave here with the ability to apply what you have learned into any topic, any subject. It doesn't matter if you are kindergarten or 5th grade, or if you are middle school, or if you are high school in a college prep class, or if you're in a credit recovery modified course or ELL. It doesn't matter, because the skills remain the same and the content is there. There's also one other thing that I want to point out before we go around here is that every student is at a different range of readiness, okay? There's a different range of readiness, and we need to make sure that we can approach this in a place that meets all of those students and all of those needs where they are. So, all right.
Absolutely. So oftentimes what we hear, and I'm a central office person, so I'll lump myself into it. A lot of times what you hear is like, let's just get the score. Let's worry about the score. When in reality, if we focus on the process, as we know, we're going to end up helping our students meet their goals. But it's funny when we talk about improving ACT scores, because if this is something that you just Google, you see what sorts of things come up. Oftentimes outlandish, unrealistic links to sites about getting perfect scores or making your score jump by 10 points.
Statistically not very probable.
No.
And it'll cost you a pretty penny.
You'll be investigated. I mean, the kid will get the little investigation letter if they go up that much between different administrations. So the focus always then turns to just getting that score, getting that composite score. And so as we talk about what this means for us, and I wrote prep classes, I've taught them in multiple districts, but when it comes down to it, there are no real just shortcuts to help a kid fix their ACT score. It's not a quick fix. You can't just take a prep class and get better. There's some low-hanging fruit that we can help kids understand. Maybe help them improve a point or two, but for a lot of our kids, that's not going to help them meet their college readiness goal, whether it's for a scholarship or for admission to the school they're trying to get into. And so there are no magic bullets out there. There's no just one size fits all in terms of tips or tricks. And I know most of us probably do have some sort of prep class at our schools. Those can help some. So please don't think we're trying to just completely discredit that by any means. But what we're really looking at as historians is what can we be doing curricularly in our class that will help our students meet their goals on a longer term basis.
Okay.
So that's where we get to our focus on reading for information that helps them perform better across the board and being purposeful with practice with our students.
And the one thing about that is, again, that constant issue of time. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for ACT practice. If it is embedded within the curriculum as part of something that you just do, and it doesn't have to be big, just little practices, more touches that a student has with exposure to this, the more successful they're going to be because they're going to practice it over and over and over and over again. And so that's kind of the idea of being purposeful. When do you implement something like this? And how that looks is going to depend on your purpose and the time of the year that you're looking at. And we'll get a little bit into that more later on.
Absolutely. So I wanted to give just a little bit of context in terms of how the ACT is scored and what's it look like, because we know we have some folks in here who might not have seen it since they took it. So overall, while we focus on the composite score, what that means is that is the average of the 4 scaled scores, the 4 sections on the ACT. Kids focus on that number. Oftentimes our administrators focus on that average number for our building, without taking it to the next step and looking at what the subject scores are, or really going deep and looking at the sub-scores on those sections that help identify where a student is strong and where they might need some improvement. So each test is a bit different in terms of the amount of questions and times, but they are all scaled to 36. And then the 4 are added together, and a raw average is developed. Unlike College Board with the SAT, and a lot of what we talked about today applies to the SAT too, because it's close reading, it's reading for information. They're very above board when they make changes. They make big announcements, hey, this is happening. The ACT is very secretive. And they don't put a lot of press release, they don't talk a lot about it, but the changes that have happened over the last couple of years, and there have been changes to the test, are all designed to make it less predictable or less coachable for students. So they're trying to take out even further the tips and tricks, some of the pacing guidelines that we used to use with students. And they don't just shout that from the world. In fact, they've held with the amount of time each test takes and the number of questions, how they're rolled out on the sections has also changed. And you may not even hear anything about this unless you have a student who might be taking or has taken it a couple times, and then you hear on Monday after they took it Saturday, like, whoa, the reading test this time, it had a section that had 2 different reading passages on the social sciences one. Well, they're putting compare and contrast writing on it now. Historian A, historian B within one section. Kids haven't practiced it, it catches them off guard. So when I say the 4 sections, these are the 4 main sections in order. The English test, which is the longest in terms of questions, 75 questions in 45 minutes. That's your grammar, sentence structure overall, evaluating writing, adding sentences, taking sentences away. Second section is a math test, 60 questions in 60 minutes. About half of those questions are some sort of word problem. And this, again, is where we get to the importance of being able to read closely and extract the information, something that we can all support in our social studies classrooms. The reading test is the 3rd test. This is after the break. Oftentimes, students are very fatigued by this point. 35 minutes, 40 questions is really difficult to get through even for the best students. So the passage that you looked at, a student who's going to get through this entire test has just under 9 minutes every time they turn the page to read the content and answer the questions. And then finally, the science test, also 40 questions in 35 minutes. They really messed with the pacing on this test in terms of number of experiments and made it to where a kid's not going to feel confident sitting down anymore, again, to make it less coachable. Those are the 4 tests that are averaged for your score out of 36. The optional writing test is not factored into that score of 36. It does not make the test harder or easier for a student to score on the 36 scale. There's all sorts of myths out there about that. It's either post-secondary institutions that require it, recommend it, or don't recommend it.
There's also a point of interest if you are, especially at the high school level, if you have students that are taking high school courses for college credit, or if they're trying to, get ahead in pacing with that. In many cases, they require them to have an ACT score. And if they don't have an ACT score, then they have to have something that would be equivalent to show their ability in order. And since some of the questions, like with social studies, they might not have a requirement, but they might have to have like a 32 in the reading section. And so those are ways that we can help support students' ability to be successful in college, especially if they're starting earlier in high school. So,
to give you a little context, the national average is usually right around 21. It's usually a 20.9 or a 21.1. For those of you who are in Missouri, a lot of times our students talk about bright flight. To get to that level, we're talking a 30 or 31, and that number has fluctuated a little bit the last couple of years. Just to give you a little bit of context, the most stringent public university in our state to get into for floor for ACT score is MU. 24 is the lowest.
okay. So what I'd like for you to do here real quick, and we're going to try and speed this up a little bit so we actually have some time to work and talk. And so ACT standards, one thing that is really nice is they have a lot of wonderful resources on their website. So if you turn into your folder, you're going to find 3 things in here I want you to take a look at. The first one is the reading curriculum review worksheets. Now what this thing is here, and I'll hold it up, this thing here is basically close reading. If you want a student to get anywhere between the 13 and 15 range, then these are the things that you would probably want to include in your curriculum, okay? Now if you flip the page, and you see the exact same thing, but if you want to have a range from 16 to 19, you would include these things in your curriculum, okay? And this allows for differentiation, you know, if you know where your students are and what their abilities are. And then also the next page is if you want 20 to 23, what would you be able to do? So when you look at your own curriculum, you can actually take a look at these things here and see, you know, well, if 24 is the bottom score that MU will accept, and you have a lot of kids that are really interested in that, or whatever, you know, you have to identify kind of, if this is what the ACT says the skill base needs to be, then taking this into consideration as you are working. Obviously, we would all like our students to be able to get that wonderful 36, whatever. But the key is that this is kind of a worksheet that will help you as you look at things to make sure that what you are creating and having students do is truly going to be what will help them advance in the ACT, okay? And that is simply the difference between, I mean, you guys have worked with standards enough, being able to locate important details if you want to have a 24 to a 27 range. But if you want to get further than that, a 28 to a 32 range, it's going to be more than just locating. It'll be something more than that. So you take a look at that here. We won't spend any more time on that, but it's just a reference for you. The second one is the reading standards, and it is set up the same way, just a little bit bigger space, and it gives you the ACT readiness benchmarks. And again, if you're looking for a 13 to 15 range for close reading, these are what you need to do. But if you move down here to 20 to 23, it's a little bit beefier of what the expectations are. And then you get over to the very end from 24 to 27 and then 33 to 36, and it is significantly more detailed. Again, allowing for differentiation of things to consider. And they do this for each one of these. They have the closed readings, they have central ideas, themes and summaries, relationships, word meanings and word choice. And I would also like for you guys text structure to look at what you said that you noticed about these things here. You said vocabulary, tier 1, 2, and 3. A lot of times students are missing questions because of a tier 2 word that is not content specific, but they don't understand, say, like what advocate means. And they've missed the question because of a tier 2 word. So that's an excellent observation. Another one is the formatting on here. That was very true as well. Sometimes that formatting has meaning behind it, especially in those humanities readings. If they don't understand that, then it won't help them. The schema is definitely something of significance, but also those question structures, how they are put together, the content, how it is. So all of those things come out here in text, craft, and structure. This is very much a reading test. So this is something else as well. Now the one thing here, don't hate, we're talking about Kentucky. This last one here is about a alignment to core standards for the Kentucky combined curriculum. Now let's just be honest. Curriculum in Missouri for American history is not going to be that much different than curriculum in Kentucky or Illinois or Iowa for that matter. And so this is something that's just a reference that we found for you to take a look at if you're interested, okay? And so that will move us on here to our solution to this. And maybe not solution is the correct word, but maybe the approach here is practice. And so if Kyle, you can go to the next one. If you define practice, the noun is the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method as opposed to theories. So it is the actual application. Verb is to perform. Verb, to carry out or perform. Method, custom, repeatedly, regularly. That is practice. So.
And this is where, I used to always tell my students, like, guys, I was a good student. I did well on the ACT, but I'll be honest, it wasn't until I got to college before I started realizing when I'm approaching fiction, I need to, before I even start reading, set my mind for what I need to be reading for when I'm reading fiction versus reading history versus reading science. And that's, again, where we as history educators, we can do a lot to shape our students' understanding of, okay, so when you're reading something historical, I don't care what the content is. Here is what you need to be looking for, as opposed to reading fiction. As a trained historian, I have a hard time reading Game of Thrones, even to this day, because I want to read it like a historian with like names and make little charts. And that's not appropriate for that sort of reading. On the reading test here, a kid has to change their approach every 8.5, 9 minutes. And so giving them exposure and practice within the context of our subject and of the particular topics or the units of study is extremely helpful.
This idea of scaffolding is important, which is why you have those worksheets with you as well. So providing on a regular basis continued practice, and so it's got to be consistent. Everything has got to be consistent. 7 habits, of highly effective people, and they say so many times before a habit actually is developed. So you have to practice.
Yep. Something else I think that we often overlook is the reading level. And I know there's all sorts of problems with like reading indexes and all of that, but to put it in context, I think a lot of times we think with our upperclassmen that the textbook is a rich enough resource, and it is not on par with the reading level of something that a student's going to see on the ACT or the SAT, much less other items that they're going to be exposed to or are sometimes exposed to even while they're in high school. And so you could see in general ACT and SAT come in around 1180, which is around like a 12th grade reading level per se. I always was really caught off guard that USA Today's reading level was there because I never thought that reading it, I'll be honest with you. And then certainly, oftentimes people think, well, we have a lot of students who are not going to college. They don't need to get to the certain levels of proficiency. Workplace reading materials are at a high reading level. So again, we're supporting their overall career readiness. And then certainly when you start getting up to post-secondary texts, it's way beyond what our students do. So knowing our students and knowing how to scaffold appropriately over the course of the year to where we're at least giving them some exposure to reading levels up here that for a lot of our students may be really stretched, but that's where we can work with them in terms of, so what do you do if you don't understand whether it's a tier 1 or a tier 2 word? How do you approach it? And I'm not just talking about getting ready for a standardized test. Just in general, what do you do as hopefully an educated person in society?
Okay, so here's the question of how we did it. Now, when I say how we did it, I should actually, let's reiterate this fact. This is kind of a work in progress that Kyle and I are working on, okay? We have been playing around with it and tinkering with it, and this is something that we are going to start doing. And so before long, we're actually going to start giving these readings out to teachers within our district. They're also going to be handing them out to people that are part of our social studies consortium in the Kansas City area and say, hey guys, what do you think of this? Try this out and let us know what you think. So we haven't actually run through and done any of these readings yet because it is a work in progress. But the idea, the concepts behind it are all good ideas. So just how we did it. So when we say that is how are we putting together our materials? So the first thing is we look at those curriculum worksheet checklists just to identify kind of where we are. Look at the reading standards, identify that score range, and then start looking at content-specific text. What do you guys already have that you use? The problem that we found is that it takes a lot of time to identify things in the level that it's the same amount of text that students would see on an ACT. Either it's way too long or it's way too short. And trying to cut down and find that exact specific thing that is important that you really want to hit. And one concern is copyright materials. Martin Luther King Jr. text, you cannot use any of his speeches because that is copyrighted material. And so what you would even think about that. Now, if you're in a social studies classroom and you're just teaching your thing and you have it, that's one thing. But if you're putting together materials that you're going to distribute, whether you are giving it free of charge or not, you have to actually start looking at issues of copyright. And you have a circumstance you're dealing with a school for the blind, and that brings in a whole other level of I guess issues to think about, concerns to think about if you have to get it converted into a different text. And so looking at those types of things. But the hardest part, as we all know, if we have a test generator to make multiple choice test questions for this, that is wonderful, right? It is hard to write a deep multiple choice question. That is probably the most challenging things, which is why we like to let the test generators do it for us, even we know that they are not good. We know that they are not good. And so crafting those questions and then trying to anticipate what students will write so that way you can plan ahead for the next step in that scaffolding. And so one of the things we also did, if you have not taken a look at those Missouri Learning Standards, on the teacher view, there is a whole section of resources. So our plan is to look at those resource suggestions and start going to those to start looking for our excerpts, because Google, as you know, will give you 57 million options of things and how do you cut it down. So we're going to start with that. Okay.
And as a part of this process, and this is another item that you have in your folder where it mentions crafting questions. So basically I took a whole bunch, I took like 20 different ACT social sciences readings, boiled them down to around 10 or so after I started seeing some patterns. And so I developed a cheat sheet essentially for our teachers where I give an example of like maybe what the reading was on the test, the length of the reading, and then I go through and just give the front end of the question stems. So our folks can start getting accustomed to what types of questions get asked for historical or social sciences text on the ACT. And when you go through, you start seeing a bunch of patterns. And so we use this as a starting point as we've messed around writing questions a little bit. But like Emily said, it is really challenging to do this. And so that's where we're working on tapping into like a network of our teachers to be able to do this.
Okay. And so, again, like we mentioned before, and this will be the last note before we're actually going to start looking at some text, if you will. How you administer a practice depends on the time of the year. If it is down to that ACT test time, then give them the real thing, right? Let them practice with it. But if you're trying to build that stamina, do it as like a bell ringer or do now at the beginning of the hour and say, hey guys, we're going to do this. Don't time it at first, but then start timing it later on. And then even if it's just a short text with 1 or 2 questions rather than the whole 5 or 6. And so it depends on what you want out of it. Again, that's why we said purposeful. So that is our plan. It would allow you to differentiate. It would allow you to see, I want close reading here versus I want to deal with text structure, to deal with, I want to see if they understand the idea of, it says it can be clearly assumed by such and such. What is that assumption? Do they know how to do that? And so those are those skills that come out of the ACT. And so what we've done here, there we go. We're actually going to give you guys some things to look at. Okay? Now, this right here, we want you to get in groups so that you can work through it. We're going to have you read passages that we've given you, and you are going to create questions. Okay? We're going to aim for at least 3 questions for each reading. If you can get 4 or 5, even better. All right? And so we are not giving you anything that we have done. We've made several, but I'm not sharing them with you because we don't want to skew what it is that you come up with. Okay? So no model this time around, and go ahead and you can pick 1 in your group that you decide. You can pick 2 if you want to. But we're going to try to identify that every reading at least gets a touch on it. So.
And so what you'll see in your folder is just one packet that has like 5 different texts. And we try to be really intentional in terms of let's pick some American history, let's pick some world history, let's pick some government, let's pick something that might be able to be used at middle school as well, because we just weren't sure on who we had in the audience. You can see right off the bat that none of the texts that are in here are the full length of an ACT text, and that's intentional on our part. And so we've tried to pare it down to something where maybe in 4 or 5 questions you could get at the heart of some of the learning. Because we're not talking about turning our social studies class into an ACT reading prep class. But we are trying to help our folks be mindful of how a student is going to be assessed in a reading. And let's do some practice over the course of the year.
All right, so with that, guys, go ahead and pair up and pick a reading that you find interesting and holler out which one you're going to do. And if you guys, you can work in pairs, you can, whatever you would like. We've got break up so we can get more of the readings done. The more work we do on these, the more we have to share, right? All right, are you guys going to pick the first one? Yeah. Okay, so this group up here has reading number 1. Are you going to work over here?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Which one do you want?
We'll take number 4.
You take 4,
Are there 4?
just the two of you back there, and then you two will work together?
Sure.
You want to do,
Are you saying, is White Man's Burden 4?
I guess.
Okay,
okay,
all right. You want to make it easy, just do the last reading?
okay?
That's that good?
1, 4, and is that 5?
Okay.
Okay, and what are we going to do up here?
Yeah.
You going to do 2, 3? Okay. Excellent, perfect. All right, thank you.
Yes. The whole lot that jumped out as being. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking too, more the phrase rather than for that one, a particular word, right? 145, the Spanish sloth, would that be? Pillage and extortion, yeah.
know a STEM about like the main idea, either of a specific paragraph or of the passage as a whole.
Okay.
We were just talking about when you brought up the vocab piece, like
Oh, you have white man's burden.
I don't know that there's a specific word that seems like an obvious choice for like these kind of stems as used in line whatever the word blank means.
Well, you could do one of those things that is, it can be reasonably assumed that the author either supports or does not support. Yeah, perspective. Because that's one that you can read it both ways. Very good. And poetry is such a hard thing for students to get anyways. What do you think? You can come up with a couple of questions? A couple of questions? Okay, good.
Or 13 here. It's used a lot.
Yeah.
Just checking the time.
Yeah, exactly. There's another one further back on the page. Yeah, so that'd be a good. Right. Yes.
That's the next step.
We have a couple of things that have come up here. The issue of how do you write your distractors? Because it's really easy to do the question STEM and come up with the correct answer, but then finding reasonable distractors that are not totally off the wall, that become a higher DOK than just a 1 is that's the really hard part.
United States was. Okay, so and are all 100% supported.
And that could work well because
But it's not the United States.
What you've been studying, what the
It is
Plaid
tricky.
Amendment is really trying to do. So the main purpose of the passage is, what is this amendment? Yeah, so is the person who wrote this someone Filipino, somebody who is American? Right. Which goes back to her speech at the earlier session of how important were we really at that point? Our world duties were still pretty small for. Yeah, but, yeah, something about the bias of the author. Oh, okay, so the author's attitude toward the subject
Okay,
can be described
so if
as.
that were the author's,
Third down here, number 11, and then
according to the passage,
right, yeah, that's true, to non-Americans. Right, they're gonna gobble it up.
yeah, so.
I, I want to pull us together here for just a second.
Only.
I want to figure out is the kids messing up or do they just not
So
know
improvement to
the
working
content,
conditions
or
is
what type of words are
that's another right answer.
Something has come up over here that I think might be relevant for all of us to discuss with. So, hey, Kyle, just for a second here. You're talking to somebody everybody else in here needs to see. So there's been a question that has been posed. Students with a lower Lexile level, explain to us what you were talking about and what your question was.
To build them up. If my population has a lower reading level, and she was saying practice daily, it may require time away from instruction. So, how much time do you actually take to build them there? And, like what strategies would you use to get them there?
Well, and I think a couple things came up with this as well. What was your name, sir, again? What was your name? Mike? Okay. Mentioned, this idea of like taking the time to write the questions is very laborious. And some people are really good at it. I'm going to say that you look like you're pretty good at this. And then there are others like me that kind of like want to shut down because the idea, like, oh my gosh, so you start thinking about all of this is really hard to do. And I think about this and how about this distractor. And so being able to have a pool of resources that is just there for people to use that do highlight all levels. And once I have something in my hand, I can differentiate the heck out of that thing for my kids once I have it. Right? But if I don't even have it, then that makes it even harder. And so being able to walk students through, and I don't say this is a daily thing, this is just something that happens consistently. Nobody has time to do everything every single day, but even if it's just like a do now and you take one little section, start with a paragraph rather than a reading, start with even looking at here, we're going to read this, and you don't even talk about approaching a question. You just have students identify terminology and vocabulary out of it. Because then as they start doing that and you model it through them, then they start to, as Kyle said from the beginning, think about that reading in an appropriate way that is meant to be for that text. Whether it is historical, whether it is poetry, or is it propaganda, is it whatever else. You could also do political cartoons or any kind of primary source document and write an ACT-style question with a visual as opposed to with a text. And again, like I said, this is one of those things that's just kind of trial and error. So our hope is to create a bunch of things to just share out. And then you guys can give us feedback and say, that was really bad, or that was really good, or here's some suggestions that we've done to make it better. And so we don't have a ton of time left. So would somebody like to share some of the questions that you came up with, or the readings, or maybe just talk about your passage and a challenge that you had? Go ahead. Go ahead. It's good.
We chose the first passage. Flora Tristan, I know from working with this document for students that they probably know someone named. So it's about reading sourcing as well, which is something we need to practice, especially in a time setting. Because I always think Tristan's a male, and then you lose like the contextualization and the purpose that Flora is actually using as a female socialist in France in 1842. She gives you a lot of those clues, but if you've already set that in mind, that's where the student's first mistake. So we went with a similar question to the Eleanor Roosevelt, and the author presents the argument about the first industrial revolution because, and then we put A, brought attention to the plight of women. B, the author wants to promote the progress brought by the Industrial Revolution. C, to illustrate the perspective of the new middle class's view of workers. Or D, to draw attention to the oppression of the working class. And so we tried to pull from distractors that miscue students would have, like go for female. If they did notice, it just says the female here, but she's being very careful to be a socialist first, a female second. And so then D would have been the answer. So picking miscues, I guess.
And everything that you just said right there is exactly something that we would be doing anyway if we were looking at any document in social studies. And it would be how we would break it down. And so that's excellent. Good job. Obviously, we need to talk some more so you can come up with some awesome test questions that you can work on for us.
And one thing I heard you say that I've heard come up a couple of times is about pace and being under the gun with time. For our kids who are below reading level or struggle with it, I try to avoid talking about pace and speed at all with them. And it is about accuracy. Not to get too nerdy with the numbers, but this reading test, depending on where a kid is, I will coach them when I'm tutoring to only do 3 readings or maybe 2 readings and do them accurately, read slowly, read well, and then on the other 1 or 2, mark A for every answer. And statistically, and again, this session's not about gaming the test, but I wanted to bring that up because I think it's really important that we emphasize to our students that we need to be accurate. And so with what we're doing in the classroom, I don't know that I would recommend that you're timing a lot of this.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
The test, the student who scored the 20 at our school, he scored the highest for that group when they took it as juniors. And he said, well, Mrs. Stedman, I still had half the test left. And he said, by the time you said time, I was going through, and he had only completed half the test and scored a 20. So it's getting them to basically know those tricks and those what to do, because for them, if they see a blank test, they know, well, that means I only scored, I only get half the points. But for them, a guess is better than nothing. So it's, knowing what to tell them is important, because
absolutely
so much of our test for me is content, but only in social science and humanities.
Right.
Whereas every other teacher has the math portion, and whereas for me, I have to be a reading teacher or a reading coach and an ACT coach in the context of history. So it's knowing how to put all of them together.
Absolutely.
And the biggest thing I think that we are hoping to get with this is to approach it where it becomes natural and make sure you speak to it when it happens. Hey, you guys know you're gonna be and the conversations you have with your kids. It's like the expectation in some buildings is that you are going to college, you will need this. And so I think it needs to frame around the conversation. It's not just for college. Right. It was how you fill out your text forms, to be able to comprehend the text that you're reading at the level that you need to do so. Another group here real quick before we wind down. Anybody? Even if you didn't get a question done, just talk us through your discussions that you had.
I think for us in the last passage, dealing with the Platt Amendment, it's so rhetorical in the message. I mean, a lot of questions being asked, with no clearly defined answer. And I think for both of us, having these stems was a huge help to just kind of work as a point of reference. But then talking through, looking for those tier 2 vocabulary and kind of looking for the weak spots, knowing, I know for our students, areas that we would have to focus on. But having the question stem certainly made it more manageable if I were to do this.
And while it can be tedious, there is value in sometimes just posing the stem without distractors.
Yeah.
Because then we're figuring out which one of those tier 2 words are they getting tricked up on in the question stem. You know, the Roosevelt reading, it's my favorite one just because it is so much history, but there are a couple just pure reading tricks on there. You know, where if you look closely, I think it's like the number 13, number 14, it asks a question about, it gives all this stuff about Roosevelt and then says, comma, the United States thought. Only one answer talks about what the United States, everything else was about Roosevelt's beliefs herself. All correct. You pose an open-ended question and you get a response from a kid, you're going to be able to tell real quick if they were able to carefully read that question and understand the demands of the question.
Okay, what about back here? Did you guys have any thoughts as you were writing, and did you come up with a question?
So we had the White Man's Burden poem, section of the poem, which was challenging to work with. But my random throw out a number was probably not a great strategy.
Sorry.
But we did talk about just how helpful the packet with the sample stems was to start thinking. And I like what you just said about the power of just posing the stem without the responses to get information about where kids are at. So we had begun that process. So like the main idea of the second paragraph is that, and so I had a couple of these, but like coming up with good alternative responses, I think there's a lot of cognitive load there.
And one thing I will say too is that we have created a template that as you add into it, it will automatically number so that the look of the test when they see it is numbered by 5s. And because if you just throw a reading in there again, if it's a page or a paragraph, it's not going to look the same as it does on the ACT test. And that can be enough to hang a kid up. And so every time we find a reading, we are putting it into this template in that structure so that it even looks the same. And so like that, yes, poetry said. Another thing to add. Yes.
Share our stigma. It's a little chunky, but according to we did the providing assistance for removal of obstruction of justice within the state of Arkansas as a third reading. According to Cassett's, the main purpose for activating the National Guard was, and then our foils are pretty awful. I threw them on the paper real quick and didn't think much about them. To enforce the governor's proclamation, to assist in the enrollment of Arkansas students in school, to enforce the orders of the U.S. District Courts, and for military exercises.
Very good. So, did you have something else you wanted to add? I didn't mean to cut you off if you were. No. Okay. All right.
I think it's important also that we understand, like I threw out the national average last year. Same usually applies for each one of the section texts. It's usually pretty close. So we're talking a 20 to a 21. For a kid to earn a 21 on the reading test, they need to usually get about half the questions correct. It's a completely different context for our kids. Man, you mean if I get half of them right, that means I'm at the national average? Yes, which is crazy to think about. But helping our kids understand that is also important because just like anything else, like our kids sometimes get defeated feeling working through this. And if they understand, you get half of them right, you're going to be hitting the national average. You get into most state schools in this state. It's crazy.
So how do you balance that with the reality of like if we had teachers giving tests in which only half the questions the kids got right, that would be unacceptable.
It would be unacceptable.
So like how do you balance?
So this is where, I'm glad you brought that up because this is where sometimes teachers start getting uncomfortable talking about the ACT with their kids or talking about approaches to the ACT with their kids because a kid will say that right back to them.
Well, I just think you got to be careful about what portion of your assessment is going to be attached to preparing them. You can't be all of it, otherwise you're going to replicate those percentages.
Absolutely, you will. Though I do encourage, if you're doing it untimed, you remove some of those barriers. But if you are doing something for a timed exercise where you're truly wanting to replicate it, that's where I start. I get nervous about entering like a grade or a number in the grade book based on that because it doesn't match up. That's another layer of the coaching with our teachers that whether we talk ACT or AP or anything, well, I gave them an AP release test. Yeah, and you put it in with the real percentage? That's not how an AP test is assessed. But
I think our discussions when we created, decided to do this was for it simply to be practice with no grade attached at all whatsoever. If you wanted to add a test question or whatever here and there, it was really like for me personally, with my kids, it's just going to be, we're just going to do this. And it's just going to be a discussion we have as a means to discuss the content. And at the same time, we're going to learn and have some practice. There was no intent to have this be, this is the type of assessment you should be giving for every course that you take, not at all. It simply is a non-graded practice so that there is exposure. And I know that maybe people might have some philosophical maybe concerns about that, but I would much rather it be practice so that it's neutral and so that you can get better for the purpose of getting better, rather than this is going to be your grade, so by golly, you better get it right. That completely defeats the purpose of it. And so because we are now out of time, first thing is just like the reflection of all of this. If nothing else, I hope that actually taking a look at this, you've benefited with thinking about that process. And if you are interested in working with us and getting some information or identifying some readings so that we can work with them, because we're going to actually be asking teachers, hey, what are you talking about? Can you please give us a reading so that we can pick it apart? So that at least there's one reading for each unit that they have that's a practice. And if you can contribute to our pool of readings, that we can then stumble through and come up with questions.
And this is our little Kansas City metro area cohort where we're all working together among school districts saying, hey, let's collaborate and develop a bank of these things.
Right. So if I have it, then every school district that we talk to can have it too. And if you want it, we will give it to you as well. And if you have something that you want us to work with, share it. I mean, send an email. Say, I found this great reading. I need your help, please. Because that's something that time is an issue. We can't ask everybody to do this on their own. So if we all work together, then we all have access to something together. And again, it's a beginning of an idea. We're working on it. And we would love your help.
So with these articles, do you want to write about 800 words? Is that about the standard that you're looking
That's generally on the real ACT, yeah. 8 to 840-ish usually is where they fall.
And if you have something that's specific that you want, then we'll go from there. And if you have something like, here's this article and it's 18 pages, find something out of it that's relevant. We can do that too, but So the idea, and one of the big things, like I did say, we are going to focus on those resources listed in the Missouri Learning Standards. There's a lot of those things on there, again, that are wonderful resources that nobody gets to. But hey, if you want it, here it is. And so that's kind of our approach.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
If other questions, we'll stick around. Otherwise, have a great afternoon and a great rest of the conference.
And we have business cards there if you would like to take one.